Started. My name is Rachel Schaefer. I'm the Seattle Policy Manager with Cascade Bike Club and Washington Bikes. And welcome to the Washington Bike Walk Roll Summit. We're excited to have you with us today for this 4-day virtual summit, and we're thrilled to see people joining us from all across the state and beyond. We'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. This summit is virtual, and those participating are joining us from many lands. Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes are two statewide organizations, and we acknowledge the land our offices sit on in the Puget Sound as the traditional home of the Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribal nations. If you don't know whose lands you are currently on, you can look in the chat in a minute where you'll find a link to a map that you can use to look at your place on the land. Without these communities, we would not have access to this environment. We take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here today. And I'll also note that we are recording this session, so it will be available after the summit is over. The summit is hosted by Cascade Bike Club and Washington Bikes, two sister statewide organizations with a shared vision of a safe and healthy future where bicycles bring people together, eliminate inequity, and create thriving communities. Cascade serves bike riders of all ages and abilities throughout Washington, educating new riders, advocating for safe places to ride, and holding events and rides. And Washington Bikes advocates for bicyclists' rights, endorses political candidates, holds officials accountable, and works to shape policies that will make bicycling more accessible for all. And now I'd like to thank our sponsors whose contributions are allowing us to put on these 14 panels with registration free for everybody. So thank you to the Washington State Department of Transportation, Columbia Bank, and DERO. And now an intro on the session that you'll be hearing from this morning. Again, my title is kind of cut off, so I can't read the full title, but at least I've introduced it in the beginning. But we'll have 3 panelists speaking today: Juliette Rizzo, John Waterman, and Armando Zalata. And we'll be learning about how language is a powerful foundation for how we address ourselves and our passions for inclusion. People are the biological engines who create and execute policies. Law and programs are the catalysts for change. This program includes disability advocates and infrastructure accessibility champions to weave these 3 elements together to discuss how we build successful inclusion and accessibility of all road users with disabilities. So after I'm done, we'll pass it over to our panelists, and we'll have the rest of the hour for their presentation and Q&A. So for those attending, if you have questions throughout the session, please put them in the chat, and we'll collect them and share them at the end with our panelists and get through as many as we can. And then last thing to know is that we'll also be providing a Google form where you can provide feedback on the session at the end of the session. Okay. And that is the end of my slides. So now I will pass it off to our panelists to go ahead and begin their presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm going to introduce Juliette Rizzo, who's going to lead our introduction and talk about the power of language that John and Juliette and myself have all sort of encountered in our pathways in working with disabilities. So here is my dear friend, Juliette. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Z. I'm Juliette Rizzo. I'm the former Miss Wheelchair America and an advocate, a pedestrian advocate, a safe streets advocate, and just delighted to be here today. All of your programming is so incredible. You talk about progress, you talk about policy, you talk about programs, but we are honored and delighted that you have included us in such amazing and technical sessions to talk about people, because it is people and people's abilities that drive the change that we are looking for. We've all come together today recognizing the importance of all the great work that you do, all the great champions that are in the room. And I just want you to know, we recognize the city planners, the engineers, the advocates, the grassroots advocates, the volunteers, all of you that have come together to affect change, in this space. Disability is the one minority group that any one of us can join on any given day. And we have to be ready. And all of you are ready and getting ready. And that is the most exciting thing for us. When I think about Cascade and learning about Cascade, I think about your work, your work with complete streets, and streets wouldn't be complete without everyone being included. Move Ahead Washington and your great efforts, you're moving ahead together. And what I want to do as I start, as Dr. Z said, this presentation is about inclusion. So I would love for you to put in the chat your own definition of inclusion. I'd love to see some of those. And Dr. Z, as they come in, if you will read some of those, what is your definition of inclusion? What is your definition of inclusivity? Let's watch the chat for a couple of minutes. What are you doing in your work to be inclusive? I see Sarah Wood. She's a Target Zero manager for King County. She's housed at Kent Police Department. Thanks, Sarah, for being here today. Who else? Who's working on inclusion, and what is your definition of inclusion? What great things are you doing to be inclusive? I know there are some of you out there doing great things.
The coffee may need to perfuse a little bit longer as we all wake up, perhaps.
Well, and I encourage you, during this session to put some of those things into the chat. The term inclusion, basically means that we appreciate the use of talents by everyone, the skills of everyone, the gifts and talents, of all people. And that is what we're here to do today, to share the importance of, including everyone and eliminating barriers, to believe that we are all, interconnected in the transportation space, in transportation networks, in bicycling networks. I'm excited because, cycling, and Dr. Z could add to this, as could John. Cycling has really led the way to increase, sensitivities about what access truly is on our streets and what it truly looks like and how we achieve, safety for everyone. Dr. Z, I know you've always said some profound things about that. Do you want to add why cycling has really led the way here?
I think for me, it's the long arc of history, and as well as for John, we both have been doing advocacy work primarily for cycling in the past 30 years. And I think once you start looking at where the bike or the cycle goes, you realize, oh, there are other people that have huge needs. And so you come to understand, oh, this intersection needs to be changed. This needs to be a place for transit to drop off people for their last mile. We need to have, button activated crossings for 6 lanes of traffic. We need bump outs so that line of sights are much more improved. And this all comes back to, we in the cycling, maybe we're being patronizing or paternalistic, but we sort of feel that our own evolution realizes that it's on the coattails of cycles. We need to decenter it away from cycles and really aim at the whole population. And
I appreciate that, Dr. Z. I really do. And this session and us being here is kind of the model that we want to share. I utilize a wheelchair for mobility, and I always loved the idea of being able to ride a bike. And Dr. Z and I came together, and he's an avid cyclist and I'm a person with a disability, and we didn't even know that we had anything in common. And yet, here we are today discussing, inclusion together, and that's, what it's all about. And so I'm reading some of the comments that are coming in, and I love, I think it was BD that said, what is inclusion? It's a plan to include, not exclude. And I saw someone else say, it's about travel for all users, but thinking about what travel means for all users. One comment right now, I work with the Seattle Department of Transportation on accessible curb ramps improvements, and also help manage a nonprofit regarding emergency rides for people with disabilities. And I am excited because John will talk today, and Dr. Z is giving you a thumbs up. John will talk today, and you'll hear the voices of many people that he works with, firsthand and personal about what it means to utilize transportation and to ride a bicycle and to get to work, with a disability, and how important that is. So again, we know that cycling has really paved the way, and we are you know, we want to be included in the bike lane and on public transit, and we want all of you to work with us to welcome people of all abilities into those bike lanes. And I'm looking at more comments. We think about the needs of people with disabilities and other populations that need higher attention, such as higher non-English speaking translation services, staff, language liaisons, higher elderly population, reaching out to our seniors, doing walk audits. And that's part of my background, and how I got into this space was actually doing, you know, walk audits across America and making sure that everybody was at the table and included, you know, in part of those walk audits. And so we'll share, you know, a little bit about that.
Shall we go on to that?
Would you like to?
Yeah.
So, you know, I've been called upon across, you know, America to look at cities, and I know someone mentioned the Vision Zero work as well, and to look at, especially for people with disabilities, how our streets and our sidewalks, you know, are indeed accessible. And I had previously done a walk audit in Utah, you know, called out to look at the streets there and look at how sometimes with, you know, triple wide, you know, roads and, you know, highways, how hard it is for people with different abilities to cross the streets. A lady at a nursing home needing to cross the street when her dog, you know, ran across the road. Could she legitimately get across that, you know, street in enough time with the timing, you know, of the lights not to get killed? So, you know, looking at, you know, the realities of what's going on out there and how we can bring some of these, you know, pedestrian deaths, you know, and the numbers, you know, down. I worked with the Montgomery County, where one place that I live is in Montgomery County, Maryland, in Rockville, Maryland. And I was ecstatic when the folks that are working with Montgomery County Planning called me in as, you know, a citizen and as an advocate and said, hey, can we do a walk audit and bring all of our engineers and all of our planners together with you? And the coolest thing happened when we were going down the streets and assessing all of this space. It just happened that that day there were people with disabilities, you know, doing what we all do, walking around on the streets. And one of the ladies was visually impaired, and she just joined in and became a natural and organic part, you know, of the process. And so again, just Dr. Z, you know, maybe you want to add something to that, but, you know, working, you know, firsthand to make sure that we have the opportunities to include all people at the table when we're doing, you know, walk audits and street audits. And Dr. Z just completed some amazing work. And I'm going to just let you briefly pop on and just share your latest, which is a walk audit and its outcomes that are probably going to be released very shortly. So would you like to share that, Dr. Z?
Sure. Are you all seeing the "Do you speak inclusion" slide? Yeah, okay, thank you. So what Juliet is talking about, and again, I think it's really the underlying message that we are really talking about is the fact that we all inoculate one another. And I was involved and helped create a disability audit of the river that's between Washington and Oregon, the Columbia River, and we did a walk audit on the most visited waterfall corridor of the historic Columbia River Highway. So this is something really that came from 4 years ago in my meeting Juliet. So there are so many ways to understand the power of language that happens between two people or three people. And we have to get our messages out that we need to be creative and exploring. And one of the first questions is, do you speak inclusion? Do you have a mindset that is really welcoming? And you know, even when you look at the sideway views, the cross sections of art, you know, that's depicting the size of the lanes, you rarely see icons of people in power mobility devices. You mostly see one cyclist going down the bike path. And this is a representation that we need to somehow change. And part of that is we have to ask ourselves about, you know, what is inclusion? How do you represent that? How do you encourage that?
Thank you, Dr. Z. I appreciate that. And that's what this session is about, you know, how we, you know, bring this into action. And I remember my very first, tricycle, and, I utilize a wheelchair for mobility based on a mosquito-borne infection in childhood. And, I had to give up my training wheels, for a wheelchair. And so you may very well be asking what in the world, is a person, in a wheelchair speaking at, a conference about cycling and, bicycles. But in Maryland, where I used to live, it used to be against the law to even have your wheelchair on the sidewalk. And I think about all the changes that we've, had to make to include people not only on the roads, but on the sidewalks, and, to take back the space that is, rightfully ours to, be included. And I live between the two different cities. I live in Rockville, Maryland, and as the pandemic came through, I could no longer get my personal care needs met for nursing care and personal care assistance. I could no longer, with supply chain issues, get my wheelchair and durable medical equipment needs met. And I found that I needed to be closer to family and closer to where I could get resources as a person with a disability. So I relocated to Cape Coral, Florida, where I found a home that indeed had bike lanes in front of it. So I knew that I could, get out and get on those bike lanes. And so during COVID, I was incredibly isolated. I literally could not take the vaccines. So that meant even more isolation. And my solution: getting outside, getting in the bike lanes, getting out in nature, getting out on the trails, getting out on the rail trails, and, looking at places and spaces where I could legitimately get around. And so, I wheeled around my neighborhoods, and as I wheeled around my neighborhood, there was a nurse, and she saw myself riding in my wheelchair with my partner. My partner is cognitive disabilities, developmental delays, no labels at all, an incredible, brilliant man who loves to cycle. And sometimes he rides on the back of my wheelchair, but he requires, due to a traumatic brain injury, the abilities for support so he can ride. So as I'm riding around my neighborhood, this nurse I don't know screams out to me. She goes, "I love your bike." She goes, "It's one of those cool wheelchairs that the back goes back and you can tilt in position." She goes, "That is your recumbent. I hope you realize that." And so, given that, yes, that is how I ride. And if you get a minute, there was a young man that just took a big ride on the Great American Rail Trail in his wheelchair last week. It's called Ian's Ride. And he talks about how his wheelchair is his bike. And so, for many of us, getting out there is so important. And I just happened to be one of those people in the direct hit of the hurricane yesterday. And so while there are absolutely no bike lanes in front of my house right now, and we're still waiting to see how I will be able to get back into my home, I look forward to the rebuilding of that community so that I can indeed, get out and enjoy life. So we are all, yes, Dr. Z.
No, I was just going to say, I'm going to move up the next slide. And so this all confronts the word disabled. What is disabled? It's not the 1900s anymore. It's not the 1950s anymore. And even the difference from the past 20 years to now, there are important changes. And, we're moving on. Like Juliet said in the very beginning, all of us could be have an episode of disability, whether it's a hip repair, whether it's an MS episode, whether it's a broken wrist, whether it's a traumatic brain injury. So we're all vulnerable humans, and having that access is really important.
Dr. Z, we have a mention in the chat that I think reinforces what you just said. And the acronym disabled, was up there because a young woman in my travels as Miss Wheelchair America said, what does the acronym disabled stand for? DISABLED, deserving individuals seeking a better life, an education, and a date. People with disabilities want everything that everyone else wants. And, I'm looking at this, Eric said in the chat, inclusion for me is asking who has not been heard from, who is still in need if a proposal is implemented. Can I adjust some ways to make my efforts serve everyone? I think those are, great questions, to ask as we start to practice inclusion. One of the things we wanted to share about language is that some people with disabilities do not identify with the disability or with the disability community. And Dr. Z, indeed, he's a doctor that worked with a very medically fragile community, but this is, something. Some people don't identify as having a disability. They just want to get out and have fun. Next slide. One of the pieces that to elevate is to just acknowledge people. That one person with a disability is just that, one person with a disability. So ask those great questions that even, Eric was just sitting there and saying, we need to ask people what they need and want in this space. Everyone's experience with disability is very unique to them. Disability is not something to be fixed. It's not something to be cured or eliminated. I want to be recognized as a person, not the problem. Disability is only, one facet, of my life. In today's world, we focus, a lot on making sure that everyone, as we talked about, is indeed included. And we mention ableism. Ableism is discrimination. And, as I just mentioned, being part of this hurricane that has just hit and having my house in the heart and in the center of the damage, I want to make sure that I can get to my home. I want to make sure that there is a community out there that understands that I may need assistance right now. I have the same needs as everyone else does. And to avoid discrimination, to avoid social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. Ableism assigns inferior worth to people with developmental disabilities, emotional, physical, or psychiatric disabilities by devaluing potential. And all of us here today are here to look at the language of inclusion and the language of potential. So we talk about ableism, and us, and failing to incorporate accessibility so I can get to my home, or so I can get to the grocery store, so that I can do what that young woman says to me. She wants to do what everybody else does. That is ableistic. And there's a picture here of me actually looking at and part of a walk audit where we were looking at how a manual wheelchair could indeed get stuck in the grates if we didn't come together as a community and look at our design plans together so that all people could navigate, communities. And I ask you to think about in your own lives and in your own, work, examples of ableism, examples of how I myself, who is still learning, might have been ableistic, in my thinking as I learn about other issues that impact people in the cross-disability community. And I don't know if you want to share anything there, Dr. Z, working with medically fragile children and sometimes there aren't any beliefs that people can achieve or can ride a bike.
Well, I think this is where you have to sit in the wheelchair. I think because you can do these things as an able-bodied person, perhaps you can experience some of the barriers. And one issue is really the handicapped portable potties. A lot of times they're just simply set on the ground, but they will have a space between the ground, the concrete, the irregular surface to enter the porta potty. So while that seems maybe trivial, but if you have to go and then you have to get someone else to help push you into the porta potty, that makes the recreation experience questionable. So there's little things much like this grate, which of course is much more expensive, but increasing the sensitivity of other people to understand what is a barrier to someone, but not to me. And again, that's the language that we need to help people with.
And paving the way for that access is so critical, Dr. Z, and person. Again, I right now have a very close friend who is an attorney who utilizes a wheelchair for mobility, and she just went to a park that has a new charging station for a power wheelchair, and she also got the new Grit bicycle so that she could ride, and she plugs in her power wheelchair into the charging station, got out to ride, only to come back and find the police waiting for her because there was a person missing from a wheelchair and called in from a local community because there was a lack of awareness about you know, charging stations, and they thought a person was missing, and they asked her to rethink, you know, what she was doing. And she said, well, I'm doing what everybody else is. I'm cycling. And so we talk about, you know, rights affirming language here, and emphasizing the person and the person first, and, you know, what they want to do first, and, you know, identity first, you know, who is this person? You know, what did they want to do? You know, I am not, you know, my disability. I am, you know, Juliet, and I happen to love, you know, the great outdoors. I think there was a question in the chat right now as speakers are going through their presentations. Please keep in mind, you know, the questions that come up. And so we have a slide on language, which we hope you can, you know, refer back to later, but, you know, avoid things like affected by and crippled by and mentally retarded. And, you know, one of the things that comes up for me many times, Dr. Z, is when I see things written about myself, or people say, well, you're wheelchair bound. And, you know, my best response is, I said, how in the world can I be bound by the one device that brings me freedom? And not only does a wheelchair bring me freedom, but an adapted bike, you know, brings me freedom. So, you know, I encourage everyone to look at the alternatives for positive language. Next slide. The goal, you know, of this session, and, you know, others, to invite all to the table. And I worked with our great disability leader, Judy Human, who is in CRIP camp and has literally made such a difference in this country. And one of her quotes really resonates with me. It says, it is no longer acceptable to not have a woman at the table. It is no longer accessible to not have people of color at the table, but no one thinks to see if the table is accessible. So I ask us all to really think about, you know, in all of our work, whether we're planners or volunteers, you know, is our work accessible? The time is now. And as Tamar said to me about this session, we can't dilly-dally, because we're talking about people's lives. And, you know, if you need assistance in reaching out to make sure that people with disabilities are at the table in your planning, you can reach out to your governor's commissions, your mayor's commissions on disabilities, your centers for independent living. You know, there are so many associations, the American Association of People with Disabilities. And like one engineer shared with me in Utah, you know, as I closed, he said, we saw a woman, you know, in a wheelchair trying to get to somewhere on a construction site, just like we're thinking about wheelchairs and bicycles. And we realized that when we were doing the construction, we didn't move the bus stops, and we needed to engage in how we could make paths and plans accessible. So what did we do? We gave her a hard hat and made her a part of the discussion, and we gave her a vest so that everybody would see her when she came through every day. And she said, in the end, she was included because the engineers who were doing the planning and working with the construction people on site included her in the after action reports as well. So, you know, one of the things I encourage all of us to do is include people of all abilities, you know, from start to finish in all of our planning, you know, for bike paths and everything else. Next slide.
So we're off to John's presentation. So I don't have all the people that are identified here, but this is John, and he's run a program for over 20 years called Programs to Educate All Cyclists. And I'm just going to simply turn it over to him, and you cue me when you want to do the video, okay?
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Z. And guys, I'm really excited to have this committee and to be talking to you guys for this segment. Hearing Juliet speak, it's the life I've been living, you know, hearing the difference and talking about if you know someone with a disability, you know someone with a disability. And disabilities vary so much from individuals who are visually impaired to individuals who may use a mobility device to a cognitive impairment. And sometimes they're in conflict. The development of a warning plate was the conflict between people visually impaired and individuals using wheelchairs. That plate allowed those curb cuts when they went in, that people were using their canes to find the edge of the road. That warning plate became a way to make the pathway accessible for everybody. And that only occurred because the two groups were in conflict. Now, individuals with cognitive impairments, do we use the warning plates at all, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do we use those for? across the street, and we have to stand behind those, right?
Yeah.
And so now those warning plates actually become a visual signal to where an individual with a cognitive impairment should stand as they're waiting to cross the street and entering it. So talking about that and looking at that, this segment is going to be really exciting. Peak started back in 1988, that's 34 years ago, after a young man was hit by a car who faced a cognitive impairment. He went from a young man who was living independently, taking care of himself, to someone who needed support the rest of his life. He was unable to work after his accident, and we were able to get him into an adaptive trike to ride after that stage. But it really indicated that we needed to have training programs for all individuals to be able to travel independently. Today, I'd like to introduce our individual sitting here. I'm gonna let each student introduce themselves. And I do use the word student because I've actually been a teacher for all these individuals. So, you ready?
Hi, my name is Ebony Martin.
Excellent, Ebony. Do you have a disability?
Yes, I do.
And what is that? Do you mind to share?
It's cognitive impairment, means math and reading is tough.
Great. And are you working right now?
Yes,
What are you doing?
I work with little kids.
At the Y?
Yes,
An after-school program
yes,
from 3 to 6?
yep,
Excellent. And that's been your dream, right?
yes.
And I'm so proud of you. Individuals with moderate cognitive impairments only have an 8% employment rate. That means 92% of the individuals who face a disability similar to yours does not have a job or have not worked, right? And everyone at this table today has worked or is working, and that's really tied into their ability to get to and from the job, which is the #1 barrier. Tria, you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Taria Sims,
And where do you live?
Taylor, Michigan.
And do you have a disability?
Yes,
And what is that?
a cognitive impairment, which means reading and writing is tough.
Thank you so much. Sean?
Cosman,
I'm Sean Cosman. And where do you live, Sean?
Kenton is good.
Great. Do you have a disability, Sean?
I do.
What is it?
Well, you know what? It's tough.
Reading and writing is tough. It's called a cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
And any other disabilities?
And I can't drive.
You can't drive, yeah.
No.
And so the bike is important, right?
Yeah.
So as we're gonna go, you three are gonna tell a little bit about your cycling experience, and then we're gonna show what you guys do as mechanics, right? Since we're in the building where we do all the work. I'm gonna start right away with you, Ebony. Tell us about this cycling thing, getting on these bikes and riding. We believe everyone can ride. It may not look the same. I think one of the most difficult things we have is what? For riding a bike for you.
What, being able to ride a two-wheeler?
I'm sorry, just speak really loud. You're bold. Being able what?
Being
Don't be
able,
scared.
being able to ride in the community.
Being able to ride in the community, right? And to go from place to place and to ride there. How'd you learn to ride in the community?
I learned with my family and being in the PEAK program.
With the PEAK program, do you ride with your family now?
Yeah,
Good. Do you ride with the PEAK program?
yes,
Have you done the 2-mile ride?
yes, I have.
What was your longest ride? You did that a year ago, didn't you? 12 miles? Did you ever think you could ride 12 miles?
No,
No, people have talked to you about riding and going through there. And was it a challenge?
yeah, it was.
Could you do it now?
Yes,
Yes. And so that's breaking that barrier is so important, that 12-mile ride and now going further, right? That's our next goal.
Yeah.
So cool. Thank you so much. What type of bike do you ride?
a two-wheeler.
A two-wheeler? What? And tell us about your bike. Where'd it come from?
I bought it.
Oh, but you bought it, and then you brought in the bikes and repaired them here, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Have you built your own bike yet?
no,
Ooh, is that something you're looking forward to?
yes,
Excellent. So everyone who participates in the program actually builds their own bike so they can ride that and go from that stage. Taria, talking a little bit about cyclists. Where do you like to ride?
In my neighborhood, it was Peak.
In your neighborhood and with Peak. Can you tell us what you've now started doing with Peak during our 2-mile ride?
I got to lead it.
So you're the leader. You're the one calling everything out. You're the one signaling what's going on there.
Yeah.
Also, were you one of the first people to use AbleLink?
Yes,
And so AbleLink is a system we've been using on the bus to travel independently, right?
Yeah,
And so it actually, it's easy to understand.
yes.
And it's also tied into what you know, and you hear our voices, right?
Mhm.
And so it's an amazing program. It finished second in the inclusive design for automated vehicles this year with the US. And we've been working quite a bit with them. And you did the first bike ride with the AbleLink system to find your wayfinding system, to find your way.
Mhm.
So, and we've been test marketing that. So it's pretty cool what you're doing there. Tell me about your bike.
My first bike I built was Peak. It was a Trek 220.
A Trek 220 and with 24-inch wheels. Why'd you need 24-inch wheels? Is it because you're tall?
No,
No. So you were able to build that, and do you love that bike?
yes,
I heard you're building another bike,
yeah, a purple rally.
a Purple Rally, so you can have it here to ride here.
Yes.
So excellent. So that's super cool. Sean, have we, how long have I known you?
Oh my God. It's second and third grade.
Second or third grade. Can you tell everyone how old you are?
43.
So you're 43 and I was your third grade teacher.
Yeah.
Well, that's a long time we've been working and riding and hanging out together, haven't we? So I know a lot about you, don't I?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you get to work? When you go to the gas station, how'd you get there?
On the bike.
On your bike? When you wanted to go to the store to pick up something, how would you do?
On my bike.
On your bike. Have you ever gone on a long bike ride?
45.
45 miles? That's a pretty good bike ride, Sean. And do you remember when they used to have that race called the Tour de Michigan? And you raced in that?
Yeah.
Did you win your age group?
2 times.
2 times. And that was against kids without disabilities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that just showed that, you know, the race and how fast you're on your bike and how much you loved your bike, how independent you are. Have you ever gone anywhere to talk about bicycling? I mean, a lot of times people with disabilities are seen as someone you need to help, right, guys?
Yes.
Yes,
Is that right?
no,
No. And so what do we do to help? And they're gonna see a video of us helping and doing that, but we're responsible to make the world a better place, right?
Yes.
yes.
Sean, what did you do? And I like how strong that yes was. Sean, what did you do to help make this a better place? Do you remember Complete Streets?
They get 3-foot pass.
So the most recent thing we helped pass was a 3-foot passing law, right?
Yep.
Did we want 3 or what did we want?
3,
We got 3, right?
Yep.
What did we want though?
5.
5. We tried to get 5, right? But we got 3. So that whole negotiation and stuff like that. But were you also part of the Complete Streets? Do you remember talking to the senators and the representatives and doing that?
Yeah.
Is that tough?
It's tough.
Do you like to talk and share your stories like this?
Not worried.
Not really, I know. So thank you for being so bold and to go through this and this live through this. So Sean, guys, you guys all can ride your bikes independently and go from place to place. But do we have friends that have more difficulty?
Yes.
And sometimes like making decisions,
Yeah.
and then we ride with them and help them?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we do that. So there's a big variance of what independence is and who can ride independently, right?
Yeah.
Like when we do a ride, we kind of put people in order.
Yeah.
Where do we put the person that needs the most help?
In the
In the middle.
closer to.
Closer to
that.
you.
No. Go.
Or on the tandem.
On the, yeah, so we can put them on a tandem if they need a lot of help, right?
Yeah,
So if someone just needs a little help on the ride on their own bike, where do they ride in our groups?
They ride
By the back
or
and the front.
no, they lead with One of the other staff.
They're leading the other staff. So they're the person right behind the leader, right?
Yeah.
And we call that the safety place, right?
Yeah.
And actually, that's what they do for a lot of racers, that like the special racers that they want to protect, they put right behind the lead riders.
Yeah.
And so where do the strongest and the rescue riders have to go?
In the back.
In the back, right?
Yeah.
In the back. So we want that because they can catch up, they can make the decision, they can do that. So guys, whenever you're doing a club ride or you're doing that, one of the biggest challenges we see is the strongest riders go to the front, they do the ride, they get to the first rest stop, they wait there for 20 minutes for the group to come. And the second they come, what do they say? Let's go to the people who are tired, who need the more rest, who are exhausted trying to keep up and making their personal achievement, and they take off and the cycle just goes. So if you're ever riding somebody and you're worried about somebody, you want them to the front of your groups, you want them in a safe position, and your strongest riders are the rescue riders in the back. And that's how we line up our groups, right?
Yeah.
We had a little discussion there. I think we need to kind of go over that a few times, don't you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're talking about this, we talked about our biking and what it means to us and the difference it means. Biking provides an independent mode of travel, recreation, and actually just that whole personal joy that we feel. And fitness that misses it in lives of people usually with cognitive impairments. I think it's time for us to talk about the mechanics, but Dr. Z, if you could pop open that video, we can see some of our students of what they're doing and the difference they're making.
Okay, just a moment.
Okay, as I do a quick transition, which I'm known for, right, guys?
Yeah.
In the middle, let's show some love for our peak students in the chat. You guys are doing an amazing job. Thank you for sharing your stories.
You're welcome.
And I'm sorry, this was the first time Tria was able to share her disability and not cry, right? I'm proud of you. So stop it, John, or we're gonna make you cry now, right? So, we do believe in disability pride. It's something we've been pushing. And when I meet someone with a disability, I congratulate them. And it's really kind of put some people off, but it's something we really are pushing with. All right, thank you, Dr. Z.
Here we go.
I'm Amanda Turner Sims.
I'm John Cosman.
I have a disability problem, cognitive impairment, which is math and reading is difficult. Reading and writing is tough.
Reading is tough. One night fine.
I'm a mechanic person. I work on bikes. I fix bikes.
Biking.
Where are you at right now today?
I'm at Peak.
Peak, or Programs to Educate All Cyclists, provide cognitively impaired adults an opportunity to learn about bike repair and bike maintenance, socialize with other people, and using bicycles, using other forms of transportation to get to their jobs and lead their lives. Detroit in particular is a difficult city. It's huge geographically, and we don't have a great public transportation system. You can have a job 20 miles away, and bus service isn't great. There's no train. Taxis and Ubers are very costly. It's a challenge for anybody to get around.
One year I was working at U of M in Dearborn, and it was very winter bad. I was on my way to work, and the smart bus dropped me off a mile away, and on my way to work I fell on black ice, and I fell on my head and my tailbone. One time the street was flooded. It didn't have a detour for the pedestrians, it only had the detour for the cars. I had to call off work.
Once I was coming home from work, I had green light. The car didn't see me, hit me.
Hearing about the needs of peak students is really important for our politicians and our legislatures.
We talked to the senators and representatives and tell them about yourself and stuff that you know how to do.
Make the bike path and then 275 and safer. No cars, nothing.
We did free bikes for kids. For the holidays, we give them bikes that we fixed up for them.
We are inundated with bikes for a very short period of time at Free Bikes for Kids. We work from October through December to get thousands of bikes repaired and redistributed to the kids in the community. This year we gave away 2,400 bikes, and we had 90 days to get that done. So we need as many volunteers to come in and help fix those bikes and strip down bikes that we're not going to give away for us to use the parts, And Peak comes in and does that, and they're so happy to participate, and they're good at it.
I feel good. I feel amazing. It made me cry, but it made me feel good inside.
Back Alley Bikes is a nonprofit bike shop in the Cass Corridor neighborhood of Detroit. Our primary focus is to increase people's education and access to bikes. And specifically, we focus on folks who use bikes or want to use a bike as a main form of transportation.
We go there every other month and help them save good parts or get rid of the bad parts.
Good ones to put aside and scrap it, the bad ones.
They can be in the shop at Peak and learn their skills, and then come to our shop at Back Alley Bikes and really apply them. It's such an open, excited energy that Peak students bring. People, when they come in, are immediately excited. They're saying, "Hey Jack, how are you? We're excited to be back." When one student left after their first time there, they were like, "Wow, this feels like our people." Folks at Peak have also been a way for us to really learn about how to be teaching bike education for different people and different brains and different styles. They're also really contributing to recycling bikes and getting parts and bikes out to Detroiters.
I'm a leader.
I'm a leader.
I'm a leader.
Everybody's got something to give back, and it's important, whatever your skill set or whatever you're capable of doing, that you have that opportunity not only to receive, but to give.
They're always being really intentional about how they interact with each other and with us. It's an incredibly thoughtful group of people.
I like helping others, showing them how to ride a bike or tune up a bike.
I teach new people that come to Peak, like travel training, the smart bus.
Showing them how to tires and trips.
There's so much in our world that tells people with disabilities that you don't belong here or we don't need you. That is a complete flaw of our systems and how the world is built. And I see Peak really trying to shift that. I think that there's so much we can create together.
I would like to see some applause for all of our stars in that video, please. Some love and applause for our Peak students. What a beautiful video.
So thank you guys so much. I do believe we're getting ready to open up for the question time.
Almost. One more thing.
Sorry, Dr. Z, I'm always pushing forward, never resting, am I?
Not a problem.
Forget Dr. Z, and you know, when I look at this video, I look at all the advocates around your table, John, and one of the greatest advocates, you know, Dr. Zaleta, and he has 30 years of advocacy, and as you know, a cyclist working on the great programs he talked to you about with the Columbia Gorge, and previously the diversity, inclusion, and equity and access, you know, point of contact for the League of American Bicyclists. You know, with that, I'll let him share a little bit about why advocacy is important and one of the great advocacy pieces of work that he has paved the way for, and how you can be an advocate using what you have and your skill sets and his examples.
Yeah, I think what John and also what Juliet's been talking about is more than just inviting to the table. And I think you've heard that over and over, that we need to invite people to the table, but also that the conversation at the table has to be a sincere, salient interaction. We have to ask people who they are, what they want, what they need. It's not just inviting to the table. So one of the issues here is a legal issue, and that I get to do the heavy-handed at the end of the program, and I'll try to do it very quickly. But several years ago in 2016, the Disability Rights of Oregon actually brought a lawsuit against the Oregon Department of Transportation. And this has been actually really beneficial, even though we've had to be adversarial. And I'm not suggesting being adversarial all the time. I have a number of good friends who work for the Department of Transportation. So, but sometimes you need the institutional rigidity and the institutional non-justice world that they sometimes that they inhabit. they need to be called to task. So what happened with the ODOT, excuse me, with the ODOT lawsuit was that a very single highway engineer several decades ago said that when you rehabilitate a highway, you do not have to put in ramps if they're not there. And so several decades went by in which there were 12,000 curb ramps missing. There were in compliance with how the curb cuts were. There weren't even oppositional curb cuts on the other side of the road. They were substandard. They had become declined in terms of trucks and vehicles running over the curb cuts and were no longer really functional. And then there was an upgrading of the cross signals throughout the entire state. So this was a $23 million loss for ODOT in the judgment that the federal courts did in 2017. We have lots of barriers to inclusion. This is a famous one on one of the most trafficked trails along the historic Columbia River Highway. So there's no way that you can get a powered mobility device up and down, let alone a cargo device to bring your children. So here again, the umbrella of what we often think of as disability work includes many other folks. So if you want a family to come out hauling a big bike that would fit 2 kids and 1 adult is really difficult. So part of the message is sometimes you really have to reach for those legal tools, and you really have to meet people in court, or you have to meet in a mediation session. So don't be afraid to have that in your toolkit as advocates, maybe even as inside people. So we hate to increase the litigation in our society. It's not always a way to solve problems, but sometimes you just have to do that.
Dr. Z, I'd like to add something to this. Dr. Z has articulated this beautifully, and he said, you know, one of our priorities is to become an ally. Don't be afraid to become an ally. We've heard tremendous voices around the table today, but there are many people that don't have voices. We need all of you in all of your respective, you know, professions to help champion the voices that can't be at the table, or, you know, need to be at the table, and to, you know, simply show up. But one of the things that I think is important is being that ally. And there's a lot of literature out there right now on how to be an ally and, you know, allyship, and there are many different types of allies. And I just wanted to throw some of these out there so you can think about which one you might be to support, you know, cross disability issues and making sure that the cycling world is indeed, you know, inclusive and accessible. You could be a sponsor, you could be a champion, you could be an amplifier of the messages that you're hearing today. You can be an advocate like Dr. Z and John. You can be that in-house expert and the content expert on accessibility. You can choose whether or not you are an upstander and you're going to elevate the messages you hear today, or you could just simply be a confidant who is confident and help empower you know, people of all abilities, as we've seen here today. So you decide: sponsor, champion, amplifier, advocate, in-house expert. Which one are you?
Yeah. And I think an extension of that is, what is an ally? And it doesn't have to be a 30-year record. It can be having the right voice at the right time. I mean, hopefully the bike mechanics that you heard this morning are the right ally, and their voice has touched your heart.
And what we put on this slide too is several ways you can be, you know, come an ally. You know, consider accessibility in every single thing that you do. Amplify the voices of all of those voices that you've heard here today. Take their stories forward, create your own stories, go out on your own adventure with someone who wants to join you. Respect individual experiences. Educate yourself in this arena. Make your content accessible. Advocate proactively, and most importantly, show up imperfectly and willing to learn.
Yeah, and we're gonna just jump to the very end, because we talked about.
Can I add one quick thing to when you made the statement that there's a cost of $23 million, but really it was $23 million won, or $23 million allocated to change, to fix mistakes that were made in the past. So no one won $23 million. That $23 million was put back in society to fix the problems they made. So that it was a reallocation where the money should be. And sometimes you're an advocate, sometimes you can be an ally, but sometimes you end up in an adversarial role. And those roles can change depending on the issue.
And there is a darker cloud in that ODOT has until 2030 in order to remediate this. So, you know, there are some sadnesses to our positive story about legal works. But I want to jump ahead to our end because we want to ask you folks in the audience really a call to action.
And Dr. Z, I'm going to back up just 1 second because I think you being the former DIENA expert with the League of American Bicyclists, if you don't mind just backing up to that last slide, there is a soundbite I think everybody can take forward, and that, you know, right now it is about in this country diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we ask that you add the A for accessibility, but to keep in mind that people with disabilities want to be included in more than the A. They want to be included in all the rest of the equation, the diversity, the inclusion, and the equity. Go ahead, Dr. Z.
I think that accessibility is at the heart of our entire transportation system. I think that then once you start thinking about accessibility, then you begin to think about equality, then you begin to think about inclusion, then you can think about diversity, but that's another program. So what we want you to do is basically expand the seats at the table. Create a seat, fill it, listen, acknowledge, and that is going to be so much important. Your projects will be made so much better for so many more people. I think the other thing is there's a subtle transition that John actually taught me, is that it's not about the bike anymore. It's really about the cycle. And when we have hand cycles, tricycles, quadricycles, recumbents, tandems, strider cycles, hand and foot powered, trailers, cargo bikes, rail riders, adventure wheelchairs, these are all cycles. And I know it's a tough call, but maybe bicycle is just only one little two-wheeled thing, and maybe all these other things are real cycles. The last thing is really what you're doing with Complete Streets in Washington and other states using the Investment Act, and that is really connect these networks that have started. It reminds me of throwing pickup sticks onto a map, and so we've got all sorts of little sections of 8 blocks, of 20 blocks, and we need to make this connected network, which is the big cry of almost everybody across the United States. So thank you very much. I know we're tippy top at 9:29, but we made
Dr. Z, we made it, and congratulations, you know, to everyone for being a part of this presentation. We will all stick around for questions. We will also, you know, take questions after the fact. If you can stay, wonderful. I think the most important thing we need to reiterate is what Tamar shared with us. And she said, you know, the goal for all of this is to give each and every one permission to act. And so we ask you to act and practice one new act of inclusivity, and to respect, you know, someone's lived experiences. And many of you have your own lived experiences in this space, and we would absolutely love to hear about them as well.
Thank you so much, Juliet, John, and your students, and Armando. That was so inspiring, and I learned so much just in this last hour. I think one question, just because we had so many different slides to go through, is if you have any resources that you would direct people to who are you know, wanting to take this the next step further and take that call to action and do something today. I think you had one slide that was really great, and I know we'll share this afterwards, but one slide that had some very specific language, you know, ways that we can incorporate more inclusive language. But I'm wondering if there's maybe one or two resources you would be able to point us to.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have it at my fingertips, but if you send me an email, it's in the chat, AJZ, I can get you the data where that ableism really language comes from. There's a variety of wonderful sources on the internet, and certainly I've gotten it from somewhere. So I have references, and I know Juliet has many more references than I do. But
Working in that space, I'm happy to provide anybody, the resources they need, or even talk through your, individual circumstances and how we might be able to assist you in moving forward and advocating. One last thing I would just like to say is, don't just invite people with disabilities to the table, invite us to ride with you.
yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know there's so much more to learn about in this space, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share these slides as well, because I want to go back and read all of them maybe several times through, so that really sinks into my brain. And I also really just appreciate that call to action, the way you put that last, Armando. I think sometimes you can feel stuck moving away from a really inspiring discussion and then figure out, okay, what's the next thing I do? And so it's super helpful to have that, like 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, I know not everything in life can be boiled down to a bullet point list, but at the same time, it's nice to have just this these clear ideas for starting, and then they just grow and keep getting bigger. So because we're a little over time, just want to respect we've got more sessions today, but I want to thank you all again so much for speaking with us, sharing your stories.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We're happy to have you, and thank you for including your contact info too. I expect you'll be getting some communications from people who participated today.
Happy to.
And yeah, Tamara put in the chat for everybody who's attending. Our next session's at 10:30, and there's also a feedback form for Google to let us know what you thought about the session. And once again, thank you to our panelists so much. I think we all learned a lot, and hopefully we'll see some of you again in the next session in about an hour.
And thank you to our peak students. Applause, applause, applause.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Good work.
Yes.
Have a great day, everyone.
Rest of your day.
Yeah. Be well.
You too.